All right, hello everyone, and welcome to City Club Missoula's March Forum, Attaining Housing in Missoula, Obstacles and Opportunities. My name is Brett Rosenberg, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the City Club Missoula's Board of Directors, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here with us today. City Club's mission is to bring people together to inform and inspire on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when we discuss very challenging issues. Before I introduce our moderators, some thank yous today. Thanks so much to the University of Montana and Alex Karklins for making these virtual forums happen so effectively. Also, thanks to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190. You can also find videos of past City Club forums by clicking the video button on our website, cityclubmissoula.com. Thanks to our sponsors, and in particular those at the executive level. In addition to the university, they are Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping to expand audience access and reliably planning and conducting our forums. We also like to highlight some other sponsors every month. So today we want to recognize the Missoulian and Windfall. Thank you all so much for your support. We are grateful to our very diverse sponsors, and we invite you to join them by going to our website. And of course, thanks to our board of directors and our administrator, Danny Howlett. City Club Missoula would also like to acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people, some of whom may be present with us today at our forum. Today, we honor the path they've always shown us in caring for this place and for the generations to come. Our moderator for today's panel is Mike Nugent. A lifelong Missoulian, Mike is the vice president of Berkshire Hathaway's Home Service Montana Properties, helping to provide leadership and oversight of the community's 17 locations across the state. He also represents Ward 4 on the Missoula City Council. Mike was the founding president of the Montana Regional MLS and is a past president of the Missoula Organization of Realtors, as well as a member of several state and national realtor committees. In addition to his real estate career, Mike has long been involved in housing issues, including through service on the Missoula Housing Authority Board and on working groups for the City of Missoula's housing plan, A Place to Call Home. He also has a long history of community and volunteer service, including serving as the current board president of United Way of Missoula County. Mike has bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Montana. Mike will introduce our panelists, and I will see you at the break for Q&A at roughly 12:20. And until then, I'll turn it over to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett, and thank you everybody for attending. The sheer number of attendees, I think, shows that this is such a huge issue, housing at every point of the marketplace. And I think that we've got a great panel to discuss that. So I'm going to introduce all four of them, and then I'll turn it over to each of them to give a little presentation on their areas. First on our panelist list, we have Eran Pehan, who's the Director of Community Planning, Development, and Innovation for the City of Missoula, where she oversees the city's efforts to promote equitable, sustainable, and quality growth and development. This includes creating and administrating innovative programs, policies, and planning, and ensuring the efficient and responsive application of code and delivery of development services. Prior to joining the city leadership team, Eran served for 5 years as executive director of the Poverello Center. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Montana, where she also is currently an adjunct faculty member. Next on our panel, we have Emily Harris-Shears, who's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Administrator for the City of Missoula's Community Planning, Development, and Innovation Department. For over a decade, Emily worked in housing at every level of the crisis response system. She implements the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and other housing policies to work toward the goal of diverse housing solutions for Missoulians. Emily has a master's in social work from Arizona State University with a focus in policy and administration. Next, we have Heather McMillan, a licensed architect. Heather is the project development director for Homeward. Homeward uses sustainable methods to strengthen Montana communities by teaching homebuyer education and financial skill building and creating safe, healthy homes people can afford. After graduating with a Master's of Architecture degree and a Bachelor's in Environmental Design from Montana State University, Heather moved to Missoula in 1998 where she worked with several different architectural firms and deepened her understanding of the need for more sustainable building practices in construction and development. Since joining the Homeward in 2003, Heather has received extensive training and experience in affordable housing and additional expertise in sustainable design. And finally, we have Commissioner Josh Schlotnick, who serves on the Missoula County, is one of Missoula County Commissioners, first elected in 2018. Prior to becoming an elected official, Josh served on the Missoula City County Planning Board and on Homeward's Board of Directors. Josh was a lecturer in the Environmental Studies program at the University of Montana from 1997 through 2018, where he co-founded both the Peas Farm and Garden City Harvest. So thank you again to our 4 panelists for giving us their time. And Eran, I will throw to you to start.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike mentioned, my name is Eran Pehan. I'm the Director of Community Planning, Development, and Innovation with the City of Missoula, here to talk to you today about our work, the city's broader work around housing. Housing is one of our key priorities of the City of Missoula, shared by the Missoula City Council, as well as Mayor Engen and all of our staff members across the city. It really was the drive behind the creation of our department, CPDI, which sought to merge our development services, which is responsible for the built environment, the direct application of code and regulation, with what was then our Office of Housing, the entity in the City of Missoula that was really identifying our goals and our values around housing through the creation and adoption of a place to call home, our comprehensive housing plan. And merging these two under the shared mission of promoting equitable growth in a resilient and sustainable community, which really drives all of our operations today. So how is the city elevating housing as a key priority? We have several things underway. First and foremost, a historic investment in a comprehensive code reform effort that the community will be undertaking over the course of the next several years. This comprehensive code reform effort is really looking at everything we do in terms of land use review and development, and how we want to grow as a community to make sure that we have the tools that we need to actualize our goals and to meet the need in the development community. We're working to achieve success through 2 really specific tracks in that code reform effort. One of those tracks will be the creation of what's called a Unified Development Code or Unified Development Ordinance. And without getting into the weeds today, essentially what happens is we have a variety of codes that govern the way you build in the City of Missoula. And those include engineering codes or public works codes, which live in something called Title 12. It includes land use codes and regulations, which live in Title 20, and then a variety of other regulations that live in things like our Parks Manual, for example, in terms of how development supports our broader open space and parks goals. And our goal through a unified development code is to bring all of those regulations into one place, to remove inconsistencies or conflicts that might exist across those different codes, and to create a code that is clear, concise, simple, that's graphic and visually representative instead of thousands of words of legalese that make it really difficult to interpret. So that is one track, really streamlining, creating consistency, creating predictability and ease with a single unified development code. A secondary track is to ensure that our code provides us the tools that we need to actualize our goals. And that occurs through innovations. Again, making sure that we're addressing housing, but not housing in a vacuum, that we're identifying the tools that we need to meet our goals around housing while also carrying our goals around sustainability, around green building, around climate action, around quality of life, and perhaps most importantly, around equity. As we grow as a community, how do we grow in a way that ensures everyone has the opportunity to thrive? In addition to this code reform effort, which we'll be launching in the next couple of weeks by bringing a consultant on board to support the community conversation and the work that our staff will be doing around that, we're working really hard on process improvements because at the end of the day, the code is only as good as we're able to implement it both as a team and together as a community. So we're thinking about things like how do we work smarter in an era where staff resources are limited. There was a great piece in the Missoulian yesterday about the labor shortage, and the city of Missoula is not protected from that, that we are dealing with staffing issues, and year over year, the demand for services, especially around land use review and building permitting, has increased dramatically. And so how are we paying special attention to internal process, making sure the least amount of hands are touching each review as possible, so that we can be efficient and streamlined throughout that. We're also thinking about how we prioritize. How do we prioritize projects that meet city goals? And how do we make sure that we are getting as many what we call shovel-ready projects in the ground as possible, so that the city is not serving as a barrier. Our efforts in this area are paying off, which is great news. In 2020, we worked with the development community to identify the most pressing needs and priorities on the ground in Missoula in the building community. What we learned is that there were hundreds of projects that, again, were what we call shovel ready. So all of the land use review associated with them had been completed, and they were just waiting for their building permits to be processed and approved. But they were stuck in the queue. There were just so many in the queue that we were having a hard time getting to them. So at that point in time, again, working with the development community, we made the strategic decision to focus more staff resource and time on getting those shovel-ready projects approved, getting more housing on the ground immediately. And the good news is those efforts have paid off. I'm gonna share a slide really quickly. In 2020, we permitted 1,308 new homes in our community. This represents a 140% increase from the prior year. So again, those prioritization efforts really paid off. The vast majority of those homes are what we call multiple unit homes. So those represent apartment buildings and for sale condos. But we also permitted a growing number of single family homes. So these include single unattached homes, what you think of when you think of a home for purchase in Missoula. Also attached townhomes and backyard homes, or ADUs as well, which weren't big in numbers. There were 8 of them, but is a great tool for infill development to address a housing need. So while we did make the strategic decision to prioritize building permits, and in my opinion, it was the right decision based on this 140% increase in homes that we will see on the market within the next year, there were losers in this situation, and we want to be upfront about that as well. Other types of land use review got less attention, things like rezones, as our staff were focusing more on this building permit process. And rezones and other land use activity is essential because it ensures we have a strong pipeline of new building permits that will be coming in the next year and in years to come. So this year, our focus is to work hard on balancing the issuance of building permits while also making sure that we're focusing on that pipeline. More good news to report, though, that even with less of a focus on land use activity last year, the pipeline remains incredibly strong. In 2020, through a variety of land use review activities like rezone, subdivision, annexation, we created a strong pipeline of new homes for years to come. Each of the numbers on the screen represent a future home or an apartment building that will be permitted and constructed over the next several years. And these include numbers upward of 1,000 new homes through subdivision creation, about 300 new homes through annexation, as well as about 27 new homes through the townhome exemption process. And I do want to note that these numbers only represent the development of homes for projects that require land use review. And so these numbers don't include the hundreds of homes that get built every year as what's called infill projects. So they get built on lots throughout the city of Missoula that are already appropriately zoned, or are vacant, and contractors and developers can just directly submit a building permit and build. And so in that sense, this only represents a fraction of that pipeline to come. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, or perhaps back to Mike, to introduce Emily Harris-Shears.
Either is fine. Emily, you're up next. So Eran threw it to you. Why don't you go right on?
Great, thanks. That's a really good primer. Thanks, Eran. It was nice to know I didn't have to cover any of that. So I'm going to share my screen. And oh gosh. Hi, I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and some of the other projects and work that we're doing in the housing policy arena to help build strengthen that pipeline, as Eran was talking about. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is the only local funding source in Missoula, and it's intended to be sustainable and nimble, and something that we can draw on to support other projects that are really prioritizing affordability in our community. It helps meet our goals that are outlined in the housing policy, not only in developing diverse housing types, but also creating additional programming like incentives and accessory dwelling units and projects like that that will also increase our access to more homes. So the trust fund was adopted in July of 2020 by council, and it is outlined, all of the details of the trust fund are outlined in the ordinance, and really kind of, I'm going to go through some of that, but I recommend and encourage you, if you're curious about the really nitty gritty details, to dig into the ordinance. It's a really easy to read document. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund balance that we're working with this year is $1.3 million, and that's a combination of carry forward from the 21 fiscal year and the fiscal year 22 budget, which allocated $700,000 in American Rescue Plan Act dollars. We have an award making cycle that is annual, and we are actually in our, it's closed now, but we're in the decision-making process for our 2022 awards. So in the ordinance, it outlines what are allowable revenue sources. And the great thing is that it's really flexible, and there's a broad range of ways that we can bring money and sustainable revenue into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Each year, we receive an annual allocation from council of a minimum of $100,000. We can also receive money from the sale of city-owned land and assets that's not otherwise dedicated to another project. We are able to apply for grants and receive those. And then we're also able to receive private donations and bequests and contributions. And then sort of under the umbrella of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which makes grants and loans, we can also use the principal and interest payments that are made from loans from the trust fund back into the trust fund to re-award those out, and then also fines and penalties. And then we have this really flexible clause in the ordinance that says any funds that may be identified as suitable from time to time, and that's a great example of how we were able to utilize ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, this year. And then in allowable funding activities, we are really kind of tasked, this is language from the ordinance, but we're really tasked with funding projects that create or preserve affordable housing. And that may look like building or acquisition or preservation of existing housing. It also looks like consumer housing programs that support people's knowledge building about the housing market, about how to become first-time homeowners, how to become renters that people want to rent to understand the process of renting, understand reading a lease and being kind of solid renters in our community. It also includes immediate housing activities like the Centralized Housing Solutions Fund, which promotes a direct connection back to housing for people who've been unhoused who are or at risk of being unhoused, and can help pay for things like deposits or first month's rent or other activities that connect people directly to housing. And then we take a capped 8% of revenue each year to administer the fund. And I just want to highlight that the trust fund is overseen by the Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee, and they support the larger policy work that's outlined in A Place to Call Home, as well as the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And their oversight looks like approving the policy manual each year and setting the annual allocation plan, but the oversight committee is not responsible for making direct award decisions. We do that through a staff scoring committee. And meetings are public, and we welcome public participation on the second Wednesday of the month from 6 to 8 p.m. And currently we're meeting on Zoom, but hopefully we'll get to do a hybrid soon. And then finally, Eran highlighted a lot of the great work, especially around building and permitting. And I just want to highlight a few of the accomplishments we've made in the Place to Call Home housing policy work. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund is a really big and vital foundational component of A Place to Call Home. It allows us to do other pieces of our work, but we've been moving forward simultaneously with other implementations, and I just want to share some of those as well. So we've created a landscape assessment, which gives the community data about people's housing needs and experiences. It helps us understand the market, and it helps inform what we allocate and prioritize in the trust fund. We've created an internal tracking system so that we can monitor expiring affordability in the community and know what might be coming up, same in that pipeline of both building, but also what we can preserve and invest in to keep affordable after their initial periods of affordability may end. We've also now done 2 award making cycles for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We've been working through land banking strategies and partnering with Berquist development on the Reed and Rowe condominium development to ensure 20% of the units in that project are affordable. And then finally, we've been working on the voluntary incentives program, which will create a relationship and opportunity to incent developers to work with us and to add affordable housing to their developments. And then looking ahead, we'll continue to support the voluntary incentives program development and the first phase of implementation, hopefully sometime in the fall or early next year. We're developing an accessory dwelling program unit to support homeowners who would like to contribute to infill in our community. We're still looking into what that looks like, how we could possibly subsidize that, and then ensure the affordability of those ADUs for a period of time. And then finally, we're really focused on capitalizing our trust fund. We have a $10 million first capitalization goal for the first 5 years. And we're doing that through a number of strategies, including creating some community engagement projects and hopefully starting some campaigns so that neighbors and community members can contribute to the fund in a tax deductible way, both to the city and potentially through a partner. So we have a lot going on in the next year or so, and we'll continue to do that in the name of advancing affordable housing work. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Emily. Heather.
All right, thanks, Mike. Danny, I'll ask you to go ahead and share the slide. My name is Heather McMillan, and I am the Project Development Director at Homeward. I'm actually a developer. We deal in a lot of different facets of housing and have for a while now. Dan, go ahead and switch. A little bit of street credibility, if that slide can be advanced. I'm not sure if, yep, go back up. Basically, Homeward is a community housing development organization. We are designated that way by HUD and the Home Program, one of the resources that the city administers and the state administers. What that means is that we're a private 501c3. And Dan, if you keep looking for that second slide, that'd be great. There you go, perfect. Close enough. We are a 501c3. We are literally no different than our for-profit counterparts that utilize a lot of these resources, except for our tax status. We utilize programs administered by the federal government, and now are thrilled to be working with the city on the implementation of some of the resources that they're coming up with and the land use policies. That's all work that Homeward works within. I did want to point out too that we also teach a first-time homebuyer education class and a financial education class as far as the programs of Homeward, and have been working with some renter assistance and pieces. As an organization, we work holistically around housing in general. Go ahead and advance. We work statewide. We are geographically bound by Montana and our CHODO status, Community Housing Development Organization, but we have worked in all these different communities, mostly by invitation, and different communities have supported housing and homes people can afford in different ways through land use policies and or resources. Please advance. One thing I thought we could spend a couple of minutes on, and we can talk about through our homebuyer education class and working with Missoula Organization of Realtors and trying to gather real-time information. We have always maintained and tried to illustrate the housing need through facts. Right now, we're in unprecedented times. Things are changing so fast, it's hard to keep up and do assessments the way we typically do. Annual updates aren't good enough, let's say, as an example. So what I was wanting to illustrate here was to show you all that the median homebuyer income and the median renter income is based on stats from last summer, and they'll get updated again this summer. But currently, the median home price as of January 2022 is at $485,000. Median home price means that's the average home price for sale and purchased in Missoula. The actual income that you need to buy that home is $146,000. So if you drop down to what the average homeowner makes in Missoula, you can see why that there's a stress and a difference. Similar metrics on the rental side. That rental average 2-bedroom rental unit at a 2-bedroom at $979 a month is probably low, because that was again based on last summer. And you can see the income required to rent that apartment compared to what the average renter was last summer, a very large difference. And it's why I think we have such a large attendance on this webinar, is because we're all feeling it across the sectors, especially with a lot of the things that were hinted at around labor shortages. We tend to look at things as an equation. Building a home that somebody can afford is an equation, and you're affected, and I steal this from the National Home Builders Association. The cost of that home is affected by laws, lumber, labor, lending, and land, all 5 things. And in a typical world, 5 things, of those 5 things, maybe 2 or 3 are difficult, and the rest is manageable. Currently, with what's going on in our environment and everybody loving Montana and moving here, and all the different impacts over the last couple of years, all 5 of those points within the development process are strained, which makes the work the city is doing and the county doing very important. It was important before, but now the only way for us to get housing stock built at any income level, we need all of these things worked on from a policy standpoint, the laws, and then also some of the resources and tools. Go ahead and advance. I'm just going to show you a couple of projects of ours here in Missoula, just again to give a little street credibility, and I can talk later about the financing structures as necessary. But the Solstice and Equinox at Broadway and Russell are two different housing credit projects. They have 35 homes at Equinox and 34 homes at Solstice. And then the first floor of the Solstice building is where our offices are located. And we use a myriad of tools, some by the city, some administered through the state and to us as individuals to build those homes. And our home buyer education center is located there. Go ahead and advance. Sweetgrass Commons is another project you might have seen down at the mill site. This is another, as Equinox and Solstice illustrated, of deed restricted, I'm going to say affordable housing, but I'm going to try not to do that because we work really hard to talk about homes people can afford, because that's really the overall goal is to any income you live in a home that you can afford. 30% of your income goes toward housing, and that is a very difficult equation right now. Sweetgrass Commons is 27 homes with underground parking, and again, those are deed restricted rental affordable homes. Go ahead and advance. Alpenglow Whitefish community, we partnered with the Whitefish Housing Authority and built 38 homes in Whitefish with a lot of assistance from the Housing Authority, but also the city and the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce was a really key integral partner in the project in the sense that we compete for federal resources that are very, very limited. There may be on average 20 plus projects that go to the state and want to use housing credits, and maybe 5 to 6 get awarded. So to be competitive, it's good to have a conversation about the whole community, and the Chamber of Commerce was instrumental in us being awarded those credits. Go ahead and advance. One thing that I did want to point out, and you guys are probably seeing here in Missoula, is that we are currently under construction. Our Trinity project is a partnership, unique partnership that we can answer questions on, but a large enough project and complex enough project that it required all three of us. As I said earlier, Homeward is a private 501c3. We do development. Blue Line is a for-profit developer. They do development of similar nature, and so does the Missoula Housing Authority. Housing authorities, nonprofits, and for-profits utilize housing credit programs. This particular project were kind of two projects that were married and took all three of us to bring to fruition. Go ahead and advance. So this is the Cooley site. This is next to Burn Street Bistro and Burn Street Commons. It is an entire city block, but the Cooley project contains 72 homes, and they are currently under construction and won't be available until end of 2020 into 2023. We have 4 buildings, 2 larger multifamily type apartment buildings with interior corridors, but then we have 12 townhome apartments that are walk up and kind of drive in. Go ahead and advance. This part of the project over on Mullen was thanks to a donation from land by the county. It is more complex. There's 100 workforce homes being built in the larger portion of that building. And we're also doing 30 permanent supportive homes, which means those are rental homes people can afford with integrated services. And it's targeted for the homeless or chronic at risk at homelessness or chronically homeless. And there'll be services available to residents that are moving in and learning skills and dealing with all the issues associated with homeless. Also, and we're partnering with the city on this, is the Navigation Center, and that is a public facility for all homeless services. There'll be a clinic there, but also other service resources available. And all of that is under construction and due to be completed in early 2023. Go ahead and advance. Yeah, and so at the end of the day, here to answer questions and really appreciate the fact that we're having this dialogue. Before it was hard to get people's attention, and now you have the city and the county working in great detail on land use, resources, and all the things to help our equation so we can build more homes that people can afford. I'll go ahead and hand it back to you, Mike, and we'll answer more in the Q&A.
Sounds good, Heather. Appreciated. And finally, Commissioner Slotnick.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and for all the other folks that have shared their thoughts today. So I wanted to start in first with kind of a description, more clear description of the problem, and then talk a bit about what we're doing here at the county. So in terms of the problem, there are a couple big themes, but the biggest one is that over time, and we've really seen this happen acutely in the past couple of years, the cost of housing has greatly outpaced wages. In a sense, this could be described as a supply and demand problem, that if we had a whole lot more houses, the cost of houses would go down and wages might come up a bit. It could all work out. We definitely need to be building more houses, and we are in a bit of an impossible situation if we frame this entirely as around inventory, because we are looking at a national demand for what is by definition a local supply. I wanted to back up a bit and talk about, just because this is interesting in framing the problem, our economic engine is our way of life. It is what we have in our home in Missoula. Easy access to beautiful public land, a happening, vibrant local culture, a prosperous economy, a thriving liberal arts college, and a great airport. You can get anywhere from here too. This is our economic engine that people choose to be in Missoula. And then once here, they create a livelihood. They work for another place. They're choosing to be here. And we have plenty of visitors who make that choice as well. It is this same phenomenon that's actually part of the problem that everyone has outlined. I'm further outlining here today. Because so many people want to be here, we can't keep up with demand. And the fact that so many people want to be here is the essence of our prosperity. It's an interesting thing just to keep in mind. Well, we're at a spot right now where people who are essential to our economy, not just the folks who brew beer and brew coffee, but people who teach our children and keep us safe, can't afford to live here. We've warned about this. People have talked about this for years, and the future is actually now. I recently came back from National Association of Counties conference, and at this conference was able to visit with people from other mountain towns, and one specific meeting around mountain towns and housing. And one truth that came out of this, someone said, a presenter said this so clearly: if we leave our housing situation up entirely to the market, we won't get the diversity of housing created that our society actually needs. That people throughout different times of their lives need different types of housing. And unless we intervene in these markets that are very distorted, and that's what ours is, we won't get the kind of housing we need. So as all the presenters talked about, what we're all doing is intervening to make sure that there are houses that, as Heather said, everyone can afford, or everyone can attain at 30%. So I wanted to talk a bit about, before I dive in here on the things we're doing at the county, just to add to this when describing the nature of the problem and the situation, I saw this great icon when I was at this National Association of Counties conference and mountain towns and housing meeting. The new internationally accepted icon for Zoomtown is a person in ski clothes sitting in the snow with a laptop. So add the Zoomtown phenomenon to the issue we're facing already with high national demand and limited local supply. And now we have folks, many of them are our friends and neighbors, brothers and sisters, who are living within the Missoula housing market and earning wages from a coastal market, which further distorts our housing issue and adds to the demand, not just demand on housing, the demand that we do create some kind of intervention so that those folks who are essential to our economy and earning Missoula wages can actually afford to live in the Missoula market. So I just wanted to touch on a few things we're doing at the county that I'm really proud of. The first one I'm going to mention is our zoning effort, which is up for comment right now. So you can check it out on our website. Lots of public comment and public meetings will be held about this over the next couple months. Within this zoning, we use something called form-based code, where basically we're getting a bit away from segregation by use of housing and use of buildings, and more towards how these buildings look and feel on the landscape. And we are incentivizing the creation of houses that cost less and multifamily housing where otherwise we just have single family housing. All this is on our website, worth checking out, and please come to public meetings and talk about this stuff. We've also initiated an inventory of all county-owned land. As Heather noted, in the Trinity project, the county was able to donate 4.5 acres of property to a project that will be hundreds of units of affordable housing and 30 units for chronically homeless folks, a navigation center, all the stuff that Heather already noted. We're able to do this because we own some land in a space that was perfect for this use. We also own lots of other property, and what we're doing right now is a thorough inventory of all that property. And then we're going to have a public process and look at all this property. Are there pieces that we could divest of for housing? Are there pieces that we could invest in for housing? Well, this is unfolding over the next 12 months. Stay tuned and please be involved. Other things I learned about at this National Association of Counties conference that I'm not saying we're doing now, but maybe we could look into. This next one was really an interesting one. So in places that are having the same issue where you have high national demand and it's also a Zoom town, the folks who live there and earn local wages, not only do they get priced out, but when they're in the act of bidding for a house, they get outbid by cash buyers. So there are places like ours that have teamed up with banks to create financial mechanisms where people can become, for a weekend, a cash buyer. It's a complex mechanism, but it does exist, and it's something we really want to look into so that people who are living in Missoula and earning Missoula wages can actually compete for Missoula houses. And right now that is falling away. Next one is we're going to continue to support our nonprofit partners, and Heather mentioned this too, and our for-profit partners in looking at how we can create new housing. And I'm hoping for new and creative ideas on this coming soon, new projects coming soon. The last one is one Mike knows a lot about because he's been a bit of my partner in crime in talking about this. We're working hard at this at Missoula County, a new tool for us recently unleashed in Big Sky, Montana. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes about this really because I'm most excited about it. It's the use of a deed restriction. And Heather mentioned this on some of their rentals. Basically, a deed restriction is attached to the title of a house and it follows the life of a house through transfer. If you sell, the deed restriction remains. So here's the tool that we're looking at. We're considering offering the owner of a house that's 120% of median value, 10% of that value right now, in trade for a deed restriction that caps appreciation at 5% per year. So imagine if we do this 10 years out, a house has only increased 50% as opposed to the skyrocketing increase we've seen right now. Hopefully, over time, if we cap appreciation, wages begin to actually keep pace with the appreciation of a house. So for 10% of the cost of a house, we can create affordability instead of building a new one. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to keep on building new ones and we aren't at the county, but keep on doing all we can to create new housing inventory. So we're moving forward looking at this deed restriction tool where not only would we cap appreciation, but we would also limit purchase of these houses to a pool of folks. That specific pool would be people who earn wages in Missoula County. Given that we're attempting to create attempting to create a wedge in the market for people who live in Missoula, but also work in Missoula. As right now, those folks are being outpaced by people who are bidding from outside our community and people from inside the community who are earning coastal wages. So we'll hope to have this idea more fully fleshed out by summertime and available for all kinds of public comment. And really excited that we're working on these efforts and really excited to work with all the partners on this call. So thanks a lot, Mike. All
right. Thanks, Josh. I will say that, after I got elected to city council, it's been really fun to have these conversations with Josh because he gets very passionate about his subjects, and it makes him more fun to dive into topics, and I've appreciated that. So I have a few questions for the panelists. So if you're in the audience and you have questions, you can start thinking about those, and in a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit more about how to submit those. But Eran, I'm going to start with you. We often hear people state that we can't build our way to affordability, but at the same time, the county has stated there's a deficit of 2,000 plus housing units in Missoula County. So we also can't solve this problem without building. So I'm curious, how does the city work with market rate and nonprofit developers alike to forge public-private partnerships that achieve the goals of our growth plan? And what roles or opportunities do you see to aid this effort?
Thanks, Mike. That's a great question. And there's truth. There are two truths there, right? We can't build our way to affordability, but affordability is dramatically and negatively impacted by a lack of supply. We have to have the homes first and foremost, and then we also have to have a level of affordability, especially in areas where the market won't touch. And that is kind of the two-pronged approach that I think our adopted housing policy addresses quite well, that there are market-based components to this. There are economics at play, and this is not a Missoula phenomenon. There are national economics at play as it relates to housing, and Heather spoke beautifully to that in terms of the 5 L's, right? There's a land piece here, there's labor shortage, there's supply, lumber, and those pieces are nationally driven, and things that it's hard to wrap our heads around how we can impact those locally. And so we do need to work on broader solutions, especially as it applies to labor, and making sure we have a strong pipeline of folks going into the trades, and all those things help, and all those things are market driven. And so what we're focusing on is how we can work to spur the market, and in many instances get out of the market's way through clear, concise, streamlined regulation, and then how we participate as part of a broader solution around those things that local government can't control, like labor and other components. But we also know, as you point out, there is a piece of this that the market will never effectively meet, and that is true affordability. And I saw a comment in the Q&A earlier about what do we mean when we talk about affordability, and there is this broader definition of homes affordable to all Missoulians. We should all be able to find something we can afford, and that's different for everyone. But there is this true segment of Missoulians who need homes that are reduced in rent, that are reduced in sale, or subsidized through first-time home buyer loans. And we're working really effectively on public-private partnerships to tackle just that. The Scott Street partnership is a great example of that, and it's a very exciting, also complicated project that I don't have time to go into detail here, but the city of Missoula has a great site called Engage Missoula. We have a page on the Scott Street partnership there. And essentially at the end of the day, we are partnering with a private entity to bring to Missoula 70 affordable homes for purchase through a community land trust model, as well as hundreds of rentals to serve everyday Missoulians, what we oftentimes call market rate homes. And so that project is a great example of how the city's kind of stepping outside of our box, stepping outside of our comfort zone to partner more directly to get these types of homes on the market.
All right, thank you, Eran. I think that I just based on the questions I see coming in, I think we're going to circle back to some of this. Heather, I'm going to ask you a quick one too, just for a little bit more education before we open it up to the group. You told us a little bit about Homeward, and there's other nonprofit development groups that also play a crucial role in kind of building income-restricted affordable housing opportunities in Missoula and around Montana. However, I would guess that the average Missoulian does not understand the variety of ways your projects are funded. So I was hoping you could discuss a little bit more about the basics of how Homeward funds the development work you do.
Be happy to, Mike. Thank you. I touched on it a bit, but the majority of our projects, we've done some home buyer projects before, but there's technically fewer resources for that, traditional resources available for that. And the meat and potatoes of what we do are deed restricted affordable rental homes. And we use the housing credit program. The housing credit program is administered by the IRS. They allocate the credits to each state, and we're a small state based on population. And then we all around the state compete, for profit, nonprofit, housing authorities compete for those housing credits annually. Those housing credits are then sold to an investor, and it's a program that's been in place since the 90s. Those housing credits are sold to, say, US Bank or other development eligible investors, syndicated, put into a partnership. We use that equity up front to build, and those investors get a tax credit for the next 10 years for maintaining that. That's a very simplified version. The other pieces to that, because it's the competitive round I talked about, the 9% tax credit is something we can only get 5 or 6 projects currently on the ground each year, which is nothing compared to the need. There's also a 4% program. The Trinity project I spoke to was a 4%. That's a non-competitive, but it's about 40% of the money necessary to build. And that's why it's a little harder to use, and we have to bring in other resources and primarily finance it with debt. And so the examples I showed, Sweetgrass Commons, Alpenglow, housing credit program is the main meat and potatoes. We sell them, we get the equity, but then we also put in resources that the city of Missoula has. As an example, the HUD, Housing Urban Development, allocates home dollars, HOME, to each state and then jurisdictions. And Missoula is its own jurisdiction. And so those home funds can be used. Community development block grant funds can be used. Our new affordable housing trust fund can be used. All of those soft funds can be put into the partnership to help build the bricks and mortar. And the housing credit program 9% example, about 70 to 80% of the cost is covered by tax credits. And so we, just like our for-profit partners and housing authorities, we develop and then we earn revenue, developer fee off of those projects. And that's what keeps our doors open and funds our programs and staff. When I talked about the 4Ls, why things are challenging, and thank goodness we were working in the city of Missoula on the Trinity project with the COVID impacts hitting everything along the chain. The federal government made some changes to the IRS program that were good long-term, but they devalued the credit. They said, okay, you can have all these extra credits. There's a boost in the program, which meant nationally there were too many credits on the market to buy. And so our equity price per credit went lower. So our funding went lower. We had to find other soft funds. So the resources the city is working on and the land donation was critical for that project to come in. And then also navigating labor and material has been a special joy lately because now they're both on fire, and we're trying to navigate how those projects are delivered. And so the offset of all the acronyms I just used and there's a few other, Federal Home Loan Bank has an affordable housing program. Those are grant resources that we can get and have put into projects. All of those come with restrictions, and the restrictions come at and why you can be assured that if we're proposing a project or utilizing these resources, we're committing to 46 years of affordability with the Montana Housing and their credit program, is that we are deed restricted. There's a title encumbered. If we go away, this still stays affordable, and we can only charge what are annually updated rents. And they are calculated on the area median income individuals. And for Trinity example, Missoula County will issue income limits, and those income limits will derive rent limits. And those rent limits it's 30% of those median income individuals. And so we're at 60% area median income and below, 60, 50, 40. And on the permanent supportive homes that I mentioned, there's other resources in the mix, state housing trust funds, but those are 30% area median income and below. So the more resources we put in, the more complex we make it for property management, long-term management, but we are forced to only charge that amount of rent, which is great because that's the benefit. The long-term trade-off is that you get lower rents and it's maintained. And so that's a crib note version of how those projects work. And I'm happy to answer questions around that, but it's causing anxiety on our front because we want to be able to help address the need between 60% area median income and higher, because we have resources that address the lower income targets, and then market is addressing, usually there's a gap of that middle income, but right now in Missoula, it's this big. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was crafted by all of us, for-profit, nonprofit, bankers, that we want to target up to 120% area median income. So that's a benefit that resource gives, is that we can go higher targets. But that's the challenge, is that we're missing that middle. And all of us may be in our homes right now we're all facing, if we move, there's equity challenges. So just seeding, maybe some additional conversation around that.
Thank you, everyone. At the risk of pointing out the obvious now, it's time for questions and answers. Q&A, it's been a rich part of the City Club Zoom discussions for a while now. Hopefully we'll get back to table talk in the near future, but for now, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions you see fit. As I said at the beginning, we are committed to civil discourse, and we ask that you keep your questions as respectful as you can and try to avoid making statements. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. Our couple board members behind the scenes will send the questions to Mike to ask our panelists, and hopefully we'll keep this conversation going. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I lost connection, so I was going to throw to Brett to talk about Q&A if you can hear me.
He did.
You're up. Please go ahead, and you should be seeing questions now coming to you.
Yeah, sorry, I got kicked out of the Zoom right in the middle of being the moderator, so apologies. The first question that kind of came through is one that Heather already started to touch on a little bit, and that was how do we define affordability? And that came from Larry Chase. So Heather, you've already touched on this a little bit, but I don't know if Eran or Emily wants to add a little bit to that. How do we define affordability in this conversation?
I think Eran and Heather talked about it and did a good job in describing that, but we can just recap that we measure affordability when people are paying no more than 30% of their income toward rent or toward their housing costs, excuse me. And we also use that metric to do our pricing formulas for affordability and all of those pieces through HUD's area median income calculation, and then our local market factors, and we use a formula to create what's affordable in the community, but really using that 30% as a guide. Or I shouldn't say a guide, a max.
And I'll just emphasize, it's 30% of anybody's income. That's what you should only be spending on your housing costs.
Yeah, and that's true, Heather, on any point of the market entry, from the most expensive market rate housing we have to, all the way on through. Josh, the next question is for you from David Lonewater. He asked to know more about the loan program you discussed and how you envision that, I guess, working out.
Okay, so the deed restriction program isn't a loan program. So I've learned about this from some of these other mountain towns, and recently now are you guys still there? Okay, Mike froze up. I couldn't tell if I froze up too. Okay. So Big Sky, Montana just unveiled something like this a couple of days ago. It's not a loan, it's basically the purchase of a deed restriction, kind of like what happens with conservation easements, but this is on a house. So the way it would work would be that the city or county would get together. In this case, it would be the county, purchase a deed restriction from a homeowner. That means that now that there's an appreciation cap put on that home. So the house will only go up 5% a year from now on. As Heather mentioned, those deed restrictions are attached to the house. And then the pool of people who could buy the house would be limited to those whose work address is actually in Missoula. And this is happening in Vail, Crested Butte, and now in Big Sky. Some of these places have put more of an emphasis on rental properties and making rentals available for workers. Some places have put more of an emphasis on capping appreciation and making houses available to folks who live in that area, who actually work and have a work address.
Yeah, one thing I'd add, Josh, to help illustrate what you're saying is that you're going to give money, cash, to individuals who own homes, and then you'll cap it at 5%.
Correct.
The average house price in Missoula in between 2020 and 21 went up 30%. So what you're doing is you're saying you can only appreciate that much. So you're limiting your future sale, but you're getting cash as that you're buying that.
Right. The
right.
appreciation is limited to 5% a year. So it's kind of a long game. It's not like instantly that house is now
Right.
attainable. But if you look out over a 10-year horizon, that house has gone up 5% a year over 10 years. If you look back the past 10 years, our houses have hockey stick skyrocketed and then multiple hundreds of percent. So it is a long game, but it's also really low cost compared to the construction of new housing. And I say that not saying this happens to the exclusion of the construction of new housing. This is in addition. This doesn't take
Great.
away from any efforts. And on the construction of new housing piece, I really wanted to mention that the biggest thing I feel like we can do in local government is to create infrastructure so development can follow. And we're doing this on a scale that I think has never been done in Missoula County, in the Swatupcane or the Build area, which eventually could hold up to 20,000 Missoulians. We're in the act of creating what could be essentially a whole new town. And this is through investing nearly $17 million of money into infrastructure, sewer, water, road grid, arterial road grid in an area that right now is greenfield. And unfortunately, this is needed tomorrow, and it's going to take 20 years to build out. And that has everything to do with all of the L's that you mentioned.
All right. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Heather, for joining in as well. We have two kind of questions that I'm going to combine because they're good. First, Representative Danny Tenenbaum said that Walla Walla, Washington recently legalized fourplexes everywhere within the city limits. Can Missoula do that too? And would you exempt any neighborhoods? And then we have a question submitted anonymously from a user that said, when multifamily units are shoehorned into the various valleys in Missoula, is there any kind of safety review related to egress in the case of wildfire or other disaster, such as an earthquake? Eran, I'm going to start with you, but then Josh, I want to get your opinion as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll start with the latter question first. So there is a pretty extensive review against what is called the Urban Wildlife Interface Plan. And so we do have a specific plan that the county and the city participate in that looks at that wildland interface, which includes wildfire. And this is a growing issue, not just in our community, but communities across the nation, especially in the Rocky Mountain West, in terms of how we grow and how we consider that adjacency to wildlands, which are more at risk for wildfire. And so that is a consideration that is that occurs with every single development we do along that wildland interface. So there is a process for that. Speaking in terms of fourplex, we have seen communities across the nation go to what's called by right. And that means that without any kind of special permission, you are allowed to build duplexes, triplexes, and even fourplexes across a community. And that includes in all residential neighborhoods. It's interesting because when you drive our streets and look at some of our most beloved neighborhoods, the University District being one of those, there are duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes all over that neighborhood, many of which look like average single family homes or kind of the old townhome brownstone type development. And they are a rich part of our development character in many of our neighborhoods. Can we do this? Do we have the authority? Yes, we do. It's part of a community conversation though, in terms of what does that look like in Missoula and how we want that to be applied equitably in terms of all neighborhoods. And so that is a big part of what we want to engage in during code reform is that community conversation about how we meet our housing needs and what that they call it low density, but it essentially just means those smaller multiple unit homes what those look like in all of our neighborhoods across Missoula. And that's a conversation we are very eager to have.
Josh, I want to get your take on this as well, because obviously in the county's rezoning effort, there's some significant kind of changes in the approach to defining areas such as single family and things like that.
Absolutely, and thanks, Mike. That's what I was going to bring up was our zoning, and this is a zoning that's up for discussion right now for the next couple months, and we made some great strides here using form-based code as opposed to traditional segregation by use to make multifamily housing more acceptable, more available in areas that would have been traditionally only single family. And now we're talking about places that are not yet built out. So we're not talking about inserting multifamily in between single family that already exist, but relying much more on design and form, on how things fit and feel, as opposed to straight segregation. As Eran mentioned, looking at places like the University District or the slant streets, you may see, or I'm sitting in Brooklyn right now, you may see duplexes next to a triplex next to a single family, but because of design, you can't really tell the difference when you're walking past. And that's what our effort would be towards.
Mike, if you don't, okay. Mike, if you don't mind, I'd like to throw in.
Absolutely.
I think that those two questions are related and it's complex. And I'll say right out, open space is just as important as housing development in my world. Our economic lifeblood is open space, and our ag land is important. And so how we grow matters. And so the pieces that we're talking about, back in the day, when we tried to illustrate this working with Five Valleys Land Trust, there was kind of a hiccup, and a lot of work has happened in the last years around zoning at the county. Thank goodness they were already ahead of the curve before COVID happened and the impacts happened, but also the city has been looking to reform as well, is that the archaic way of doing development was to let me as a developer go out somewhere and build a multifamily or one house per acre development. I drag infrastructure out there, and we have to plan our growth. The way you shouldn't let me as the developer dictate that. And so I spent a lot of time with the county zoning because vested interest in seeing that done right is that we have to plan, okay, where is our infrastructure right now? And where should growth happen? And where should we be maintaining ag and all of those pieces? And I think it's all related. The infrastructure will help with costs. And if the infrastructure is designed right, it can be efficiently managed. But then on the other side, the zoning, it's housing types. It's not just multifamily or single family. It's a fourplex or a townhome or accessory dwelling units. Those are why you like the university. The irony is that they have all of those different housing types, and we haven't had those in code for a while. And so now being able to, the different types, shared lot lines, those will help make the homes more attainable. And it's market rate needs to help. We as nonprofits and for-profits using housing credits, we all need to help in how we build. And so I think it's really important that, I mean, those are very good questions and it's all interrelated. And housing types matter and where we build matters long-term.
Yep. Thanks, Heather. And you're definitely right that it's every sector of the market. And I think that one thing that often kind of gets overlooked in the Missoula housing scene is how important churn is. And, if we don't have a place for downsizers to go, then we don't have a place for move uppers to go. And then we don't then in turn churn out entry-level housing. And it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we talk about why it's important to focus everywhere, and Commissioner Slotnick talks about intervening, I mean, that's why sometimes we talk about these things even at market rate levels where it is important to develop inventory because it creates churn in other parts of the market. Next question we have is from Nancy Picard, who asks, please address the problem of properties that have become Airbnb or VRBOs. How many properties have been removed from the market to generate income for the owners, and how can we limit this phenomenon? I don't know who wants to tackle this, but I'll call on a few of you if nobody jumps up.
So I could say a little bit at the county in our our new housing action plan was a recommendation, and this is something we're going to do. We're going to have to come up with a way to inventory actually what's out there, because we don't know right now. We're pretty limited by the state as to what we can do at the county. The city has a lot more latitude, but we first best thing we're going to do is find out how many of them there are that are out there, and then we'll go from there. I wish we had more latitude. I think the city does, though. Maybe Eran can speak to that.
Yeah, we do have a little more latitude, and we're actually already underway in that process of inventorying our current Airbnb or VRBO or vacation home market right now. So we're gathering data. It's a pretty complex project, because as some of you who have booked an Airbnb know, when you go on Airbnb, you don't get an address, right? And so those sites are not always forthcoming, but we're working with a data firm to create a good inventory that cross-references all sites and tries to get to that number for us. And what we hope is that data gathering process, that inventory, will help inform our next steps. The city of Missoula does have policy and code around this. We have what's called the tourist home ordinance that does have some basic requirements for vacation rentals in our community, but we've already got that ordinance on the books. And so what that means is when we have this inventory complete, we'll be presenting the findings from that to the Missoula City Council, and that we can say, now we know where our baseline is, and we can start to assess how this is impacting the market, and then make smart decisions about how we move ahead with policy changes.
I think Eran and Josh do a good job of illustrating how they have to look at it as a jurisdiction. And on the flip side, of course, nothing is that simple. I had a project manager at Homeward that built one in their backyard. And that's part of the mechanism that they got to move in the cycle of housing. They moved to a bigger home for their family, and that's a revenue generator, so they can afford the property overall. And so it's not that simple. And so I think there'll be an interesting conversation once we can assess how do you allow it in a way that isn't having that extreme impact, I guess, for lack of a better term.
I'm glad you said
Heather,
that.
I think. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was just saying, I'm glad you said that, because for a lot of people, having one or even part of their house is a way that they can remain in their house. So
Yeah.
It's how I afforded my first home. I
No,
rented my basement.
it's a great point. It's a great point, Heather, and it's something that I think that we hear. And we also sometimes have to be careful about unintended consequences too, because we are an economy that relies quite a bit on the healthcare industry, and that isn't necessarily, people come to town and stay for different reasons, and I think that we need to have a good, thorough conversation about that. I'm looking forward to Eran sharing that with the city council in the future. All right, Josh, the next question we have is from Rosalie Cates, who asks, how will you document eligibility for the program that is aimed at Missoula County wage earners? And what does the home buyer get? And that's similar to another question we have that kind of said, what would be the incentive for the home buyer to?
Got it. Okay, so help me make sure I hit all the pieces on this. So what does the home buyer get in the tentative? And I'm saying this, our program right now is in the formation stage. So this isn't happening tomorrow. We're actively working on this though. Home owner would get 10% of the value of their home right now in cash, in trade, for a deed restriction that caps appreciation to 5% a year and limits the pool of potential buyers to those whose work address is in Missoula. So what does the homeowner get? They would get 10% of the value right now. That's plenty of incentive. If your house is worth $450,000, you could get $45,000 right now, and you could use that for whatever you want. So there was another piece to it, but I knew if I started launching, I would forget.
How will you document the eligibility for the program that's aimed at Missoula County wage earners?
Okay, so the way this is done in other places, Vail, Crested Butte, and now Big Sky, the person who wants to buy or rent, for us it's only going to be buy, at least initially, they would have to show the county or whatever nonprofit is our partner in managing this, that they are actually, one member of their household is working in Missoula 30 hours a week, at least 30 hours a week. That's if you want to be a pool of buyers, you have to meet that. As for the other end, if you want to sell and we're calling it an affordability easement, which is a catchy name for this deed restriction. If you wanted to sell one to us, you would have to show us through an appraisal that your house was worth 120% of median home value or less. So we're not doing this on really expensive homes.
All right, thank you. Jessica Hurd asks, is the city planning on passing any regulations to protect current renters, such as the right to renew leases and rent control? And Eran, I'm going to answer a little bit of this before I throw it to you.
Good job.
Because, we received a legal opinion on this, and most of the basically the state legislature has said that cities can't interfere in private contracts between parties. And there's a state law, the landlord-tenant law. It's a series of laws that really regulates the relationship between landlords and tenants. So things like, could the city of Missoula do rent control is not something that the state legislature, in fact, it's something that the state legislature specifically said, no, they can't. So what the city can do in that area is limited. So with that, Eran, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, we have really worked hard and are continuing to work hard to try to identify what we can do that we think can move the needle in this realm. We are just so limited in terms of authority on what we can do in the rental space based on current landlord-tenant law and contractual rights of landlords. But I would say there are some good organizations that are doing advocacy and work and investigation in this space. And folks can reach out to me directly. My email's pretty easily searched on the web or on the city website, and I can connect you with those groups if you're interested. But I think at this point in time, advocacy at the legislative level is probably the most effective effort.
Can I jump in on that one too?
Yeah, please do, Emily.
I definitely agree that there are limits. And I just want to highlight some work that we're doing right now to understand what Missoulians are experiencing around housing displacement, housing challenges. So we're doing a number of listening sessions, and there we have a Engage Missoula page that I'll somehow get to your chat space that we really want to hear from people about what they're experiencing to help inform what we can move forward doing, and knowing what needs to be legislative recommendations that we can also support and move forward and pass on too. So I just want to highlight that and do a quick plug for please participating in that work. And you can contact me directly by email or phone, or you can participate on the Engage page too.
Sounds good. We're going to try and kind of speed through a few because there's a lot of good topics here. Jared Kuhn says total permitted units were up significantly last year, but the vast majority of those were rental units. Single family permits were down in the same time. So what is being done to ensure that there is a diverse mix of housing being permitted?
That's a really great question. And again, there's a regulatory piece to this and there's a market-based piece to this. I think what we are seeing is that with the exceptionally growing cost of land, that developers are hedging their bets and they're building more multifamily housing, which is rental properties as opposed to single family homes. And that is a market-based piece that we're having lots of conversations with the community about. How do we incentivize the construction of single-family homes or townhomes or community land trust homes or condos, really more of that for sale option to make sure that individuals and families interested in purchasing a home in our community have the ability to do so. We have those homes for them to purchase. But there are also some regulatory pieces in that as well. And some of that is talking about what for purchase homes look like now and how they can look different. And those might be those attached duplexes, which are townhomes in neighborhoods across our community, which allow us to build more of those and have more for purchase. And so that is a trend of seeing more rental housing built that we have seen pretty steadily over the last 4 years. And some of that is economic, but some of that we think we can work to incentivize, and that will be a big piece of what we focus on through our code reform efforts as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eran. And I think that it's also kind of important, and I think most people kind of understand this, but in the big picture, most of the projects that kind of come through and get approved by the city and the city and the county didn't go out and solicit those. That's, when the person who wants to develop, whether it's a subdivision or apartment, has the opportunity, they come submit an application and do it. So it's not like when Commissioner Slotnick is approving a subdivision, he's choosing between that subdivision and some other opportunity. And I think that sometimes that gets lost in the conversation. Heather, did you want to add anything to that?
I was going to go exactly there, Mike. I mean, that's why it's so important that the county was already started on their rezoning. It hadn't been updated since the 1970s. That's archaic. And the city is adapting as well, because we just didn't have, as developers, okay, I can do a multifamily or a single family. It's because it's allowed or what's not allowed. And I think that's really important to point out, is that I am sitting at the table with a lot of for-profit partners that want to utilize and want to figure out how to build a home that is, if you could build a home for $280,000 or $300,000 every day of the week, they would. They just can't, because there aren't housing types allowed, and they're going to be. And so that's why this is a group effort on that front. We have my home buyer educator, Julie, pulls stats for me every month, and there were a couple months ago 3 homes under 350,000 and 1 a bank would loan on. And then we got excited when 7 were available under 350 and 3 a bank could loan on, and the rest were tear downs, right? So it's a complicated piece. And it's definitely not, the city's not picking the projects. We are as developers. So make it easier for us, I guess, is what I'm saying.
There are also obviously market realities. You could get 200 units of multifamily property on land than you would ever get 200 houses. And it would be, unless you're going for a rezone, it would be significantly easier to get that through the regulatory process than it would be a subdivision. And that's just a virtue of kind of state law and how things have worked out. Anybody else want to add to that conversation before we move on to another question? All right. Sue Kirchmeyer says, how do we protect our food sources and local farming while responding to the pressure for housing? This is ironic, because this is when I first met Josh Slotnick, was years ago when the county was having this debate. And here we are having this conversation in City Club. So Commissioner Slotnick, I'm going to throw to you to answer that question.
Thanks. And Mike, I have to say, I just want to compliment you. I remember meeting you thinking, man, that's a really smart and reasonable guy. I got to make sure and talk with him later. That was you. So glad we're back here now. So as people may note, in the last legislative session, the legislature changed the laws around subdivision review, where at one time the law said that cities and counties could look at the impacts to agriculture when reviewing subdivisions. And the state really constricted that and said the consideration now is only on neighbors, not on the land itself that would be lost. So our ability to do this is really, really constrained. What we have attempted to do within our zoning, and I keep banging on the zoning, partly because I'm so proud of it. And as Heather mentioned, it really needed to be done. We got here and got it done. It wasn't like we were dragging our feet. It was different folks who were dragging their feet, not the 3 of us. So anyway, one of the things we did in our proposed zoning out in Grass Valley is we said, well, we're going to zone this 1 per 40, but we'll let you bump up to 2 or 3 or 4, quadruple the increase in density if you put all those houses right next to each other. If you put them all in a small space and save a bunch of the rest of the land, we'll allow you to have more houses. We're incentivizing density in a small space while saving a large area. And it's a really good deal, because for us, if you save 37 acres or 38 acres, it's functionally pretty much the same. But for you, if you can build 1, 2, 3, or 4 houses, it's a much bigger deal economically, and it's a better deal for all of us. So our attempt to do this right now is entirely through zoning and density bonuses, but making sure you build those houses really close to each other.
Yeah, I'll support Josh on that. We did an exercise with Five Valleys Land Trust on purpose to show, we looked at a parcel. We wanted to preserve 5 acres for ag land and put homes all around the outside, do cluster development is what it's called. The county didn't have the tools to allow it. This was early when they were doing the rezone. And I compliment that the county is thinking about this because it's complicated, but you have to incentivize density. And I'm not saying that a 200 unit rental project density, I'm saying those clustered developments, the townhome developments, housing types matter, and being able to do it in a way that's close to the infrastructure, as we talked about earlier, and planning our growth is critical. I sit on the board at Garden City Harvest, or recently stepped down, and I'm on ad hoc. I care just as much about ag land as housing, as where I snowshoe with my godchildren. So it's all related, and we're growing. We were growing before, but we have to plan our growth, and it has to be come in a variety of fashions.
Okay. And I say one more thing on this. It's really important, not just from a food system sense that we should have access to food that we grow here, but as I said earlier, our way of life is our economic engine. It's also kind of what's holding us back in terms of so many people want to live here. But the fact that we have a vibrant local food system makes us attractive. When people are choosing places to live, that's one of the criteria some people use, and a good enough amount of them that it actually really matters. And I'm glad I was trying to stay away from cluster because I was trying to not make it, but I'm glad you called it what it is. So, and I'm proud that we're incentivizing with density bonuses, cluster development on ag land.
Great. There's a couple questions in here. We're running up on the end, so I'm going to ask one and then probably answer it and then move to the next one. But maybe Heather or Eran or Emily can quickly give a stat on this. I don't know. They said, an anonymous person says, do you know what percentage of rental units are managed by property management companies? And can the city or county regulate excessive application fees charged by those groups? The second part, no, we cannot. But the first part, do any of you have any idea? I don't.
I don't, and I think we have a hard time understanding it as well because there's not necessarily an easy way to track it. I mean, our deed restricted affordable homes are just different, and those are very highly regulated. We get the money, so we regulate, so you know where those are. But I think it's really hard. The open market rentals are hard to assess. It's a good question.
Yeah, I would agree. And Emily might have more on this, but we've struggled with that data as well. We do have several large property management companies. There isn't a single entity. There is the NARPM, which is the National Association of Property Management. There is a chapter here and they do gather some data, but there are just so many small scale landlords here, and we don't have a good way of capturing that information.
And just for a little bit of history, I don't know if it was a lawsuit or a state legislature change of law, but at one point in the past, the city of Missoula actually tried to have landlords register as businesses, and that got either thrown out in court or shut down by the legislator immediately. So some of these things, you'll notice a theme here. It's not from a lack of trying, but there are some walls that are put up outside of this platform. And then the last question before we turn it back over to our chair and end this good conversation. Frank Reed asks, from a practical point of view, how does a person making average Missoula wages find affordable housing in this complex environment? Is there a point of primary contact? Is there somewhere they can start? Not all at once here. It's a tough one.
So I'd like everybody, go ahead, Emily, because we all struggle with this. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. We do struggle with it. I think, no, the short answer is no. And there are, programs and projects that are restricted, like Homeward and using Tamarack properties and knowing to sort of start there. But it does really take sometimes someone knowing kind of the landscape. So can I quickly shout out where I volunteer, the Housing Advocates Network that works with people who are looking to return to housing or at risk of losing their housing, and pairs people with advocates who can help navigate the system. And it's a really important connection point for neighbors to make between people who are struggling with their housing and people who have some stability in their housing and can focus in a different way and maybe know how to navigate that system. So I just wanted to name that as a resource people can be engaged with and volunteer themselves with if they're interested. But it is something that's really hard if you're just getting started and you haven't used it before.
And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that Homeward does and has for years the first time homebuyer education. Taking that class gets you prepared to know what you can afford, right? That literally what is your income in your equation, and there's some resources available. And we also hear through the grapevine or help directly market rate partners on, there's projects out on Mullen proposed, there's the Scott Street Homes. I mean, there are resources actively being developed to hit some of those price point targets. So just be prepared as a buyer. Know what you can, be ready for the loan and what you can afford. 30%, again, can't harp on that enough, but that class has been a huge resource across the board for a lot of people over the years.
Yep, and I think that has to be the last word, but I would just second that the home buyers education classes that Homeward does are phenomenal. And, you know, if you are a private landlord who's interested in learning more about accepting Section 8 vouchers or things like that, you can reach out to the Housing Authority as well. I mean, there are several different great resources. There may not be one individual one, but there are lots of places to start. Emily, Heather, Josh, Eran, thank you all so much for your time. Brett, I'm sorry, we're 1 minute past the hard stop. I hope we're not stressing anybody out.
Well, it
Thanks
doesn't
so
look
much
like
for letting us
it
have
doesn't
this
look like
conversation.
anything is shut down on us, so we're okay for another few seconds. Again, to the panel, Eran, Emily, Heather, Josh, thank you so much. Mike, thanks for your moderating duties. Great work. And I think it's safe to say that we could probably have a panel like this every month, and it would be as well attended and have as many good questions as this time around. It's such a big issue. Thank you to our sponsors, in particular, the University of Montana First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, and most importantly, to our audience, thank you so much. This is all because of you that we do this, and we couldn't do it without you. Please join us on April 11th for our next forum entitled State of the Community 2022, Building a Future for All of Us. It will be on Zoom, so check our website and Facebook page for registration information. We hope to be back in person in June, so stay tuned for information on that. And that's that. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.